Hey everyone. We should probably start with a really big question. How do we decide what's actually true? Today we're going to journey back to ancient India to meet some thinkers, true rebels really, who were brave enough to question the biggest, most established beliefs of their time.
No, really, take a second and think about this. Why do so many of us believe in things we can't see or touch or prove? Things like an afterlife or karma, or the idea that everything happens for a reason. It's this deep human need for meaning. But what if the answers that everyone else accepts aren't the only answers out there?
Well, today we're diving into three ancient Indian schools of thought that did just that. These are the great dissenters, the great questioners of Indian philosophy. They pushed back against sacred texts to find truth based on something else entirely: direct, raw human experience. Ready? Let's jump in.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to unpack the core ideas of the Charvaka school, Jainism, and Buddhism. We'll look at what they thought about the self, about life, about freedom, and most importantly, we're going to connect these ancient ideas to our own lives, right here, right now.
Now, these three schools get this label heterodox or Gnostica. It sounds complicated, but it's pretty simple. It doesn't necessarily mean they were all atheists. It just means they said, nope, we don't accept the sacred Vedic texts as the ultimate authority. So if truth wasn't in the holy books, where could you find it? For them, the answer was in logic, in what you could see with your own eyes, and in your own personal experience. All right, first up, we've got the most radical of the bunch, the Charvaka school. These guys were unapologetic materialists. Their whole argument was incredibly simple. If you want to know what's real, trust your five senses. Period. For the Charvakas, this was the number one rule. Perception is the only way to know anything for sure. I mean, they even argued that logic could trick you. So if you can't see it, hear it, taste it, touch it, or smell it, it's just not real. That means no gods, no spirits, no heaven or hell. The only thing that exists is the material world. That's it. This verse really sums up their entire vibe. I mean, think about it. If this life is all you've got, and death is the absolute final end, what's the most logical thing to do? For the Charvakas, the answer was obvious. Live joyously, right here, right now. So let's break down their worldview. They said there's no soul that's separate from the body, and consciousness, that's just a byproduct of physical matter mixing in the right way, kind of like how you get that bright red color when you chew betel nut. So of course that means no God, no afterlife, no cosmic justice, even ideas of good and bad, virtue and vice, just man-made rules. It's basically the ancient Indian version of YOLO, right? You only live once. But this brings us to a really interesting problem, a question they had to face. If all pleasure is temporary, and it's often mixed with a little bit of pain, is a life spent chasing it really meaningful? The Charvakas would say absolutely. They argue that avoiding pleasure just because it might come with some pain is just foolish. It's a debate we're still having today, isn't it? Okay, so take a deep breath because we're about to do a complete 180. We're moving to a school with a totally opposite view, Jainism. For the Jains, a good life has absolutely nothing to do with external pleasure. Instead, it's all about intense inner discipline and purifying the soul. The absolute, unshakable core of Jainism is this principle of ahimsa, or nonviolence. And I mean, this is a radical commitment to doing no harm. We're not just talking about other people. This extends to every single living being. Animals, insects, even organisms you can't see, because Jains believe that every single thing has a soul. The Jains laid out a very clear three-step path to liberation, which they called the three jewels. It all starts with right belief, really buying into their core teachings. That then leads to right knowledge, a deep, true understanding of reality. And all of that comes together in right conduct, which means living by five major vows: nonviolence, telling the truth, not stealing, chastity, and not being attached to possessions. Now, this is a really fascinating idea. The Jain concept of karma is totally unique. It's not just some abstract law of the universe. They believed it was a literal, physical substance, like a fine, sticky dust that clings to our soul whenever we act out of passion or anger. And it literally weighs the soul down. Just think about it. When you hold onto a grudge, doesn't it feel like you're carrying a heavy weight? That's a perfect way to understand this. So this brings up another huge question for us. Jainism says that real freedom, true liberation, comes from total self-control. It's about mastering our desires so we can stop that karmic dust from sticking to us. Think about your own life for a second. When you manage to resist checking your phone for an hour, or you stop yourself from losing your temper, don't you feel a little spark of freedom in that moment? Isn't that a kind of liberation?
Okay, our third and final school, Buddhism, offers a path that walks right down the center. It avoids the pure indulgence of the Carvakas and the extreme self-denial of the Jains. This is what's famously called the middle way, a path of balance, moderation, and, most importantly, awareness.
So the story begins with a prince, Siddhartha Gautama, who grew up completely sheltered from all the world's pain. But one day, he snuck out of the palace and saw sickness, old age, and death for the first time, and it just shattered his world. He left his royal life behind to find an answer to human suffering, and after a long, hard journey, he finally achieved enlightenment, becoming the Buddha, which simply means the awakened one.
In his very first teaching, the Buddha laid out his core insights, almost like a doctor giving a diagnosis. These are the four noble truths. First, the symptom. Life inevitably involves dissatisfaction or suffering. Second, the cause. Our suffering comes from craving and attachment to things. Third, the good news, the prognosis. There's a cure. It's possible to end this suffering. And fourth, the prescription. Here's the path to do it.
And that prescription is the Noble Eightfold Path. As you can see, it's a super practical guide for living. It's broken into three main parts. It starts with wisdom, developing the right understanding of things. That wisdom then guides our actions, how we speak, how we behave, and the whole thing is supported by mental discipline, practices like mindfulness and concentration. It's not about blind faith at all. It's a training program for your own mind.
Now, two really profound ideas are the foundation for this whole path. First is anicca, or impermanence. The Buddha taught that absolutely everything is constantly changing, always in flux. Nothing lasts. And because of that, it leads to the second big insight, anatta, or no self. This means there's no permanent, unchanging you or soul at your core. What we call ourself is really just a dynamic, ever-changing process.
So, when you put those two ideas together, you get the Buddhist answer to why we suffer. It's not because life is inherently bad. It's because we desperately try to cling to things that are, by their very nature, always changing. We get our hearts broken because we want a feeling to last forever. We get disappointed because we want our success to be permanent. Our suffering comes from that friction between what we want reality to be and what it actually is.
So, there you have it. Three powerful, dissenting philosophies. Each one looked at the accepted answers of their day and said, I'm not so sure about that. And each one carved out a totally unique path for how to live a good life.
So, just to recap it all, for the Carvakas, reality was matter, and the path was to pursue pleasure. For the Jains, the soul was real, and the path was through intense discipline and nonviolence. And for the Buddhists, the focus was on mindfulness, and the path was the middle way of awareness. And that really brings the question right back to you, doesn't it? If you were to set aside all the rules and all the authorities for just a moment, which of these would you choose as your guide? Would it be the pursuit of pleasure, here and now? The freedom that comes from self-discipline? Or the peace that comes from clear-eyed awareness? Because, at the end of the day, this is what philosophy is all about. It's not about memorizing dusty old ideas. It begins the moment we stop taking things for granted and have the courage to ask for ourselves, what does it actually mean to live a good life? In that sense, you're already a philosopher. Thank you for exploring that question with me today.